Welcome, crew, guys, gals, ghouls, friends, fiends, foes, whoever may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. Secure your tinfoil hats, hold on tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, January 12th, Monday, January 13th, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. We are no longer broadcasting live on Spreaker. I really hate it, and it took me a day to get my broadcast uploaded. So finally got yesterday's up today. But you can find us live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts. We're also live on KPNL Radio, which you can find at KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. So Sundays are generally story time, which it still is, but right before I hopped on here, I was watching YouTube as per usual, and there was this video that I came upon that I was like, man, I might have time for this, but then I had to go lock up the chicken coop and stuff really quick, and I don't know. I have said this before on the show. I like to fall asleep listening to like Be Buster or Let's Read or whatever. Like, I love horror podcasts, and people are like, that's so weird because, you know, it's scary stuff. But I don't know. I think it's the cadence of their voice and the calmness of their voice, and I just love horror. So I figured you guys might like this one too. So I'm going to play it really quick. It's only an a little over 8-minute thing. But yeah, I just thought it was super awesome, and honestly wanted to finish watching it. I only got like 2 minutes in, and I was like, I want to know more. But yeah, let's go ahead and get to it, shall we? Let's see. Let's see who we got here. Bats for Brains. And go over here and subscribe. Look what he does so far, and like I said, I only saw 2 minutes, so I hope you guys enjoy it just as much as I have so far. And yeah, right here, 2 minutes basically. That's funny. 1 minute and 59 seconds. So yeah, I overdid it there. Let's go back to the beginning.
Picture this. You're lying in bed, lights out, bundled up in your favorite blankets, and instead of drifting off to the soothing sound of rain or some chill lo-fi beats, you're listening to a story about a guy finding teeth in his walls. And somehow, that's relaxing. If this is you, you're not alone. In fact, a growing number of people are finding comfort, yes, comfort, in the deep, dark void of horror podcasts. It's a phenomenon so strange it almost sounds like its own horror story. But why is this happening? Why are people turning to spooky tales of ghosts, cryptids, and serial killers to help them fall asleep? Well, grab your nightlight, because today we're diving into the psychology of comfort horror and why fear might be the most calming thing in your life. Let's start with the basics. Comfort horror isn't about watching slasher films on repeat or falling asleep to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre soundtrack, although, hey man, no judgment if you do. Comfort horror is more like a warm hug from a ghost. It's a kind of spooky that feels safe, cozy, and maybe just a little nostalgic. I'll get to that in a second. Podcasts like the No Sleep podcast or the Let's Read podcast or the Be Buster YouTube channel, and I know Buster probably has a podcast too, but I just find myself listening to his stuff on YouTube more often. They strike this perfect balance. They don't just scare you, they soothe you. But how? They do that by creating controlled environments where the horror is just real enough to keep your brain engaged, but distant enough to feel like it can't actually harm you. It's like the mental equivalent of riding a roller coaster. Your brain says, this is terrifying. But your body knows that you're strapped in, you're fine, this is okay. Unless you're me on a roller coaster, I don't actually ride them. I'm the guy that holds everybody's stuff while they go, because I'm not getting up there. Okay, let's get a little science-y. Why does fear feel good? Well, it turns out that it's all about control. When you consume horror media, whether it's a creepy podcast, a scary movie, or one of those clickbait articles about real-life hauntings, you're willingly putting yourself in a controlled state of fear. You little control freak. Your brain responds by releasing adrenaline and dopamine. The adrenaline says, hey, we're in danger here. But the dopamine goes, no, fine. Here's a reward for sticking around. The result? It's a rush of emotions that leave you feeling oddly satisfied. It's kind of like eating spicy food. You know it's going to hurt, but you know it's a good kind of hurt. Unless, of course, you take it too far and you end up summoning a demon through your taste buds, which is, to be honest, probably already a story in the No Sleep subreddit. So, when you're lying in bed, listening to some soothing narration about shadowy figures in the forest, your brain is enjoying this delicate cocktail of fear and calm. It's fear, but it's safe fear. Here's where things get even weirder. Horror isn't just tolerable, it actually helps people sleep better. For a lot of listeners, the stories act like as a bedtime ritual. The familiar voices, the repetitive structure, and the rhythmic pacing of the narration can be incredibly soothing. It's kind of like a creepy lullaby. You know how kids fall asleep to songs about spiders crawling up water spouts. Same energy, just more blood splatter. This is where things, I think, get really interesting. I reached out to some of the biggest and most popular horror podcasts on the internet. The heavy hitters who specialize in creeping us out on a regular basis. And I asked them if they knew that people were intentionally falling asleep to the shows. And the most common answer that I got was, up until just a few years ago, they had no idea. It wasn't until they started seeing comments and reviews from their listeners saying things like this on the Let's Read podcast. A reviewer says it's the perfect podcast to listen to as you're falling asleep because of its smooth, soothing voice. I also appreciate the length of each episode. Another review on the Booze and Booze podcast says, really nice and spooky, but also calming with the rain background, and I love to have it on while studying or falling asleep. This one from the Derek Weber podcast that says, snooze fest. It's boring, in my opinion, and that is my opinion. Okay, that's fine. I feel okay. I only included that review in this video because that was a review left on my horror podcast, okay? Just being transparent. Some of the hosts even told me that they were completely surprised by this and even amazed that their carefully crafted scares meant to send chills down your spine were instead lulling people into beautiful nightmares. It's the ultimate plot twist, creating terror so soothing that it becomes the perfect bedtime story. Another big reason that horror podcasts just hit the comfort zone is nostalgia. For a lot of people, horror taps into memories of staying up late watching Goosebumps, or Are You Afraid of the Dark, or sneaking a peek at scary movies that you definitely are not allowed to watch. Even if the stories are new, the vibe is familiar. It's a throwback to the thrill of being scared as a kid, but knowing deep down your parents were just down the hall. And then there's the narrators. Horror podcast hosts have some of the smoothest, most relaxing voices in the game. They could read a grocery list and still make it sound like the prelude to a ghost story. Here, watch this. Eggs, butter, and an unholy entity lurking in aisle 5. Come on, how do you not fall asleep to that? One thing that horror fans know better than anyone is that fear brings people together. YouTube channels like Mr. Nightmare or Chilling Scares aren't just about the scares. They're about the shared experience. When you listen to these stories or these mysteries, you're part of a community that loves the same creepy, spine-chilling vibes that you do. And knowing that you are not alone in your love for the macabre is really comforting. Plus, let's be real. It's always fun to debate whether you'd survive a haunted house situation or not. Spoiler alert, I wouldn't. The second I hear a ghost whisper, "Get out," I'm already across state lines, daddling. As I was getting the script together, I wanted to include a little section on humor. I wanted to highlight a couple of shows that did a good job of scaring us while also sprinkling in dark jokes at times or just ironic instances or something, but I just, at least off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, I just couldn't come up with any. If you happen to know of any horror podcasts that are just the right balance of scary and funny, without being disrespectful to the source material, leave a comment below. You can do that on YouTube or on Spotify now. So, why do we find joy and comfort in horror podcasts? I think it's because they're the perfect blend of fear, nostalgia, and community. They let us confront our fears in a safe space, and they give us a chance to escape our own anxieties. And remind us that, hey man, yeah, the world might be scary, but at least we're not alone. Horror podcasts are the unintentional champions of bedtime bliss. Who knew that tales of vengeful spirits and unspeakable eldritch horrors could be the white noise machine of our nightmares? If you'd like to fall asleep to horror podcasts, let me know in the comments which ones are your favorite. And if this is the first time you've ever heard of this and you're still on the fence about giving it a try, just remember, your other option to fall asleep is just doom scrolling on Twitter. Don't do that. Stay spooky, stay sleepy, and remember, if you hear whispering under your bed, it's probably just your cat. Or not. Good night.
Yes, probably not. I would say no, not the cat, because the cat is either on me or some making noise. That was interesting. I really enjoyed that. A lot of sense, and like I was saying, like the rhythm of their speaking and the calmness, coolness of their voice, etc., like just lulls you to sleep. All right, so we are, what chapter are we in? Chapter 17, Section 4. And this is Stephen King's Insomnia. I usually have the app. I took it down for Bats for Brains thing there, but we'll get back up. All right. They joined the bald doctors in the hallway outside Bob Polhurst's room. Through the open door, they could see the death watch continuing around the old teacher's bed. Lois. The man closest to the bed is Bill McGovern, a friend of ours. There's something wrong with him, something awful. If we do what you want, could you? But Lachesis and Clotho were shaking their heads in unison. Clotho, nothing can be changed. Yes, thought. Lawrence knew. Done, bun, can't be undone. Lois, when will it happen? Clotho, your friend belongs to the third, to the one Ralph has already named Atropos. But Atropos could tell you the exact hour of the man's death, no more than we could. He can't even tell whom he will take next. Atropos is an agent of the random. This phrase chilled through Ralph's heart. Lachesis, but this is no place for us to talk. Come. Lachesis took one of Clotho's hands, then held out his free hand to Ralph. At the same time, Clotho reached toward Lois. She hesitated, then looked at Ralph. Ralph, in his turn, looked grimly at Lachesis. You better not hurt her. Neither of you will be hurt, Ralph. Take my hand. I'm a stranger in paradise, Ralph's mind finished. Then he sighed through his teeth, nodded to Lois, and gripped Lachesis' outstretched hand. A shock of recognition, as deep and pleasant as an unexpected encounter with an old and valued friend, washed over him again. Apples and bark, memories of orchards he had walked through as a kid. He was somehow aware without actually seeing it. His aura had changed color and become, at least for a little while, gold-flecked green of Clotho and Lachesis. Lois took Clotho's hand and held a sharp little gasp over her teeth, then smiled hesitantly. Clotho, complete the circle, Ralph and Lois. Don't be afraid, all is well. Boy, do I ever disagree with that, Ralph thought. But when Lois reached for his hand, he grasped her fingers. The taste of apples, the texture of dry bark, was joined by some dark and unknowable spice. Ralph inhaled the aroma deeply, then smiled at Lois. She smiled back. No hesitation, a smile. And Ralph felt a dim thought of confusion. How could you be afraid? How could you even hesitate when what they brought felt this good and seemed this right? I sympathize, Ralph, but hesitate anyway, a voice counseled. Ralph? Ralph! She sounded alarmed and giddy at the same time. Ralph looked around just in time to see the top of the door of room 315 descending past her shoulders. Except it wasn't the door going down, it was Lois going up. All of them going up, still holding hands in a circle. Ralph had gotten this through his head when momentary darkness, sharp as a knife edge, crossed his vision like a shadow thrown by the slat of a Venetian blind. He had a brief glimpse of narrow pipes that were probably part of the hospital sprinkler system, surrounded by tufted pink pads of insulation. Then he was looking down at a long tiled corridor. A gurney cart was rolling straight at his head, which he suddenly realized had surfaced like a periscope in one of the fourth-floor corridors. He heard Lois cry out and felt her grip on his hand tighten. Ralph closed his eyes instinctively and waited for the approaching gurney to flatten his skull. Clotho, be calm, please be calm. Remember that these things exist on a different level of reality from the one we are, and you are, right now. Ralph opened his eyes. The gurney was gone, although he could hear its receding wheels. The sound was coming from behind him now, and the gurney, like McGovern's friend, had passed right through him. The four of them were now levitating slowly into the corridor, with what had to be a pediatrics wing. Fairy tale creatures pranced and gamboled up and down the walls, and characters from Disney's Aladdin and the Little Mermaid were decaled onto the windows of a large, brightly lighted play area. A doctor and a nurse strolled toward them, discussing a case. Further tests seemed to be indicated, but only if we make it at least 90% sure that the doctor threw Ralph, and as did Ralph understood that he had started smoking again on the sly after 5 years off the weed, and was feeling guilty as hell about it. Then they were gone. Ralph looked down just in time to see his feet emerge from the tiled floor. He turned to Lois, smiling tentatively. Sure beats the elevator, doesn't it? She nodded. Her grip on his hand was still very tight. They rose through the 5th floor, surfaced in a doctor's lounge on the 6th floor. 2 doctors, the full-size kind, present, one watching an old F Troop rerun, and the other snoring on the hideous Swedish modern sofa. And then they were on the roof. The night was clear, moon was gorgeous. Stars glittered across the arc of the sky in an extravagant misty sprawl of light. I also forgot to do this. Yeah, I forgot after that video to go ahead and share this picture. This is the one I usually post when we do story time. There we go. The wind was blowing hard, and he thought of Mrs. Perrin saying Indian summer was over. He could mark her words. Ralph could hear the wind, but not feel it. Although he had an idea he could feel it, if he wanted to. It was just a matter of concentrating in the right way. Even as this thought came, he sensed some minor, momentary change in his body. Something that felt like a blink. Suddenly, his hair was blowing back from his forehead, and he could hear his pants cuffs flapping around his shins. He shivered. Mrs. Perrin's back had been right off the weather changing. Ralph gave another interior blink, and the push of the wind was gone. He looked over at Lachesis. Can I let go of your hand now? Lachesis nodded and dropped his own grip. Clotho released Lois's hand. Ralph looked across town to the west and saw the pulsing blue runway lights of the airport. Beyond them was the gridwork of orange arc sodiums that marked Cape Green, one of the new housing developments on the far side of the Barrens. In some place in the sprinkle of lights just east of the airport was Harris Avenue. It's beautiful, isn't it, Ralph? He nodded and thought that standing there and seeing the city spread out in the dark like this was worth everything he had been through since the insomnia had started. Everything and then some, but that wasn't a thought he entirely trusted. He turned to Lachesis and Clotho. All right, explain. Who are you? Who is he? And what do you want us to do? The two bald doctors were standing between two rapidly turning heat ventilators, which would spring brownish-purple fans effluent into the air. They glanced nervously at each other, and Lachesis gave Clotho an almost imperceptible nod. Clotho stepped forward, looking for Ralph and to Lois, and seemed to gather his thoughts. Very well. First, you must understand that the things which are happening, while unexpected and distressing, are not precisely unnatural. My colleague and I do what we were made to do. Atropos does what he was made to do, and you, my short-time friends, will do what you're made to do. Ralph favored him with a bright, bitter smile. There goes freedom of choice, I guess. Lachesis. You mustn't think so. It's simply that what you call freedom of choice is part of what we call Ka, the great will of being. Lois. We see as through a glass darkly, is that what you mean? Clotho, smiling, his somehow youthful smile. The Bible, I believe, in a very good way of putting it. Ralph, also pretty convenient for guys like you, but let's pass on that for now. We have a saying that isn't from the Bible, gentlemen, but it's a pretty good one just the same. Don't gild the lily. I hope you'll keep it in mind. Ralph had an idea, however, that might be a little too much to ask. Section 5. Clotho began to speak then, and he went on for a fair length of time. Ralph had no idea how long exactly, because time was different on this level, compressed somehow. At times there were no words at all in what he said. Verbal terms were replaced with simple bright images like those in a child's Rubik's puzzle. Ralph supposed this was telepathy and thus pretty amazing, but while it was happening it felt as natural as breath. Sometimes both words and images were lost, interrupted by puzzling breaks in communication. Yet even then, Ralph was usually able to get some idea of what Clotho was trying to convey, and he had an idea Lois was understanding what was hidden in those lapses even more clearly than he himself. First, know that there are only 4 constants in that area of existence where your lives and ours, the lives of the overlap. These 4 constants are life, death, the purpose, and the random. All these words have meaning for you, but you now have a slightly different concept of life and death, do you not? Ralph and Lois nodded hesitantly. Lachesis and I aren't agents of death. This makes us figures of dread to most short-timers. Even those who pretend to accept us and our function are usually afraid. In pictures, we are sometimes shown as a fearsome skeleton or a hooded figure whose face cannot be seen. Clotho put his tiny hands on his white-clad shoulders and pretended to shudder. The burlesque was good enough to make Ralph grin. But we are not only agents of death, Ralph and Lois. We are also agents of the purpose. Now you must listen closely, for I would not be misunderstood. There are those of your kind who feel that everything happens by design, and there are those who feel all events are simply a matter of luck or chance. The truth is that life is both random and on purpose, although not in equal measure. Life is like... Here Clotho formed a circle with his arms, like a small child trying to shape the shape of the earth, and within it, Ralph saw a brilliant and evocative image. Thousands, or perhaps it was millions, of playing cards fanned out in a flickering rainbow of hearts and spades and clubs and diamonds. He also saw a great many jokers in this huge pack, but so many as to make up a suit of their own, but clearly a lot more, proportionally speaking, than the 2 or 3 found in the usual deck. Every one of them was grinning, and every one was wearing a battered Panama with a crescent bitten out of the rim. Everyone carried a rusty scalpel. Ralph looked at Clotho and widened his eyes. Clotho nodded. Yes, I don't know exactly what you saw, but I know you saw what I was trying to convey, Lois. What about you? Lois, who loved playing cards, nodded palely. Atropos is the Joker in the deck? That's what you mean? He's an agent of the random. We, Lachesis and I, serve that other force, the one which accounts for most events in both individual lives and lives' wider stream. On your level of the building, Ralph and Lois, every creature is a short-time creature and has an appointed span. This isn't to say that a child pops out of its mother's womb with a sign around its neck reading, cut cord at 84 years, 11 months, 9 days, 6 hours, 4 minutes, and 21 seconds. That idea is ridiculous. Yet, time passages are usually set, and as both of you have seen, one of the many functions the short-time aura serves is as a cloak. Lois stirred, and as Ralph turned to look at her, he said an amazing thing. The sky overhead was glowing pale. He guessed it must be 5 in the morning. They had arrived at the hospital at around 9 in the morning on Tuesday evening. Actually, 9 o'clock on Tuesday evening, and now, all at once, it was Wednesday, October 6th. Ralph had heard of time flying, but this was ridiculous. Lois, your job is what we call natural death, isn't it? Her aura flickered with confused, incomplete images. A man, the late Mr. Chase, Ralph was quite sure, lying in an oxygen tent. Jimmy V opening his eyes to look at Ralph and Lois in the instant before Clotho cut his balloon string. The obituary page from the Dairy News, peppered with photographs, was not much bigger than the postage stamp of the weekly harvest from the local hospital and nursing homes. Both Clotho and Lachesis shook their heads. Lachesis. There's no such thing as natural death, not really. Our job is purposeful death. We take the old and the sick, but we take others as well. Just yesterday, for instance, we took a young man of 28, a carpenter, 2 short-time weeks ago. He fell from a scaffold and fractured his skull. During those 2 weeks, his aura was, Ralph got a fractured image of a thunderstruck aura, like the one which had surrounded the baby in the elevator. Clotho. At last the change came, the turning of the aura. He knew it would come, but not when it would come. When it did, he went to him and sent him on. Sent him on where? It was Lois who asked the question, broaching the touchy subject of the afterlife almost by accident. Ralph grabbed for his mental safety belt, almost hoping for one of those peculiar blanks, but when their overlapped answers came, they were perfectly clear. Clotho, to everywhere, Lachesis, to other worlds than these. Ralph felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. That sounds very poetic, but I think what it means, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the afterlife is as much a mystery to you guys as it is to us. Lachesis sounded a bit stiff. On another occasion, we might have time to discuss such things, but not now. As you have no doubt already noticed, time passes faster on this level of the building. Ralph looked around and saw the morning had already brightened considerably. Sorry? Clotho smiling. Not at all. We enjoy your questions and find them refreshing. Curiosity exists everywhere along life's continuum, but nowhere is it as abundant as here. But what you call the afterlife has no place in the 4 constants. Life and death, the random and the purpose, which concern us now. The approach of almost every death which serves the purpose takes the course with which we are very familiar. The auras of those who will die purposeful deaths turn gray as the time of finishing approaches. This gray deepens steadily to black. We are called when the aura, and we come exactly as you saw last night. We give release to those who suffer, peace to those in terror, rest to those who cannot find rest. Most purposeful deaths are expected, even welcomed, but not all. We're sometimes called to take men, women, and children who are in the best of health, yet their auras turn suddenly and their time of finishing has come. Ralph remembered the young man in the sleeveless Celtic jersey he'd seen bopping into the Red Apple yesterday afternoon. He had been a picture of health and vitality, except for the spectral oil slick surrounding him, that was. Ralph opened his mouth perhaps to mention this young man or to ask about his fate, then closed it again. The sun was directly overhead now, and a bizarre certainty suddenly came to him that he and Lois had become the subject of lecherous discussion in the secret city of the old Crocs. Anybody seen them? No. Think they ran off together? Eloped, maybe. Well, not at their age, but they might be shacked up. I don't know if Ralphie's got any live rounds left in the old ammo dump, but she's always looked like a hot ticket to me. Yeah, it looks like she knows what to do with it, don't she? The image of his oversized rust bucket waiting patiently behind one of the ivory-covered units of the dairy cabins while the springs boinged and sproinged salaciously inside came to Ralph, and he grinned. He couldn't help it. A moment later, the alarming idea that he might be broadcasting his thoughts on his aura came to him, and he slammed the door on the picture at once, yet wasn't Lois looking at him with a certain amused speculation. Ralph turned his attention hastily back to Clotho. Atropos serves the random. Not all deaths of the sort short-timers call senseless and unnecessary and tragic are his work, but most are. When a dozen old men and women die in a fired retiring hotel, the chances are good that Atropos has been there, taking souvenirs and cutting cords. When an infant dies in his crib for no apparent reason, the cause more often than not is Atropos and his rusty scalpel. When a dog, yes, even a dog, for the destinies of almost all living things in the short-time world, fall among either the random or the purpose, is run over in the road because the driver of the car that hit him picked the wrong moment to glance at his watch. Lois, is that what happened to Rosalie? Clotho, Atropos is what happened to Rosalie. Ralph's friend Joe Weiser was only what we call fulfilling circumstance. Lachesis. And Atropos is almost what happened to your friend, the late Mr. McGovern. Lois looked the way Ralph felt, dismayed but not really surprised. It was now in the afternoon, perhaps as many as 18 short-time hours had passed since they had last seen Bill, and Ralph had known the man's time was extremely short even last night. Lois, who had inadvertently put her hand inside him, probably knew it even better. Ralph, when did it happen? How long after we saw him? Lachesis. Not long, while he was leaving the hospital. I'm sorry for your loss and for giving you the news in such clumsy fashion. We speak to short-timers so infrequently that we forget how. I didn't mean to hurt you, Ralph and Lois. Lois told him it was all right, that she quite understood, but tears were trickling down her cheeks and Ralph felt them burning in his own eyes. The idea that Bill could be gone, that the little shithead in the dirty smock had gotten him, was hard to grasp. Was he to believe McGovern would never hoist that satiric, bristly eyebrow of his again? Never bitch about how cruddy it was to get old again? Impossible. He turned suddenly to Clotho. Show us. Clotho, surprised, almost dithered. I don't think, Ralph. Seeing is believing to us short-time schmoes. Didn't you guys ever hear that one? Lois spoke up unexpectedly. Yes, show us, but only enough so we can know it and accept it. Try not to make us feel any worse than we already do. Clotho and Lachesis looked at each other, then seemed to shrug without actually moving their narrow shoulders. Lachesis flickered first 2 fingers of his right hand upward, creating a blue-green peacock's fan of light. In that, Ralph saw a small, eerily perfect representation of the ICU corridor. A nurse pushing a pharmacy cart came into this arc and crossed it. At the far side of the viewing area, she actually seemed to curve for a moment before passing out of view. Lois delighted in spite of the circumstances. It's like watching a movie in a soap bubble. Now McGovern and Mr. Plum stepped out of Bob Holhurst's room. McGovern had put on an old Derry Highlander sweater, and his friend was zipping up a jacket. They were clearly giving up death watch for another night. McGovern was walking slowly, lagging behind Mr. Plum. Ralph could see that his downstairs neighbor and sometime friend didn't look good at all. He felt Lois's hand slip onto his upper arm and grip hard. He put his hand over hers. Halfway to the elevator, McGovern stopped, braced himself against the wall with one hand, and lowered his head. He looked like a totally blown runner at the end of a marathon. For a moment, Mr. Plum went on walking. Ralph could see his mouth moving and thought, he doesn't know he's talking to thin air, not yet at least. Suddenly, Ralph didn't want to see any more. Inside the blue-green arc, McGovern put one hand to his chest, the other went to his throat and began to rub as if he were checking for wattles. Ralph couldn't tell for sure, but he thought his downstairs neighbor's eyes looked frightened. He remembered the grimace of hate on Doc No. 3's face when he realized a short-timer had presumed to step into his business with one of the local strays. What had he said? "I'll fuck you over, Shorts. I'll fuck you over big time, and I'll fuck your friends over. Do you get me?" A terrible idea, almost a certainty, dawned in Ralph's mind as he watched Bill McGovern crumple slowly to the floor. "Lois, make it go away. Please make it go away." She buried her face against Ralph's shoulder. Clotho and Lachesis exchanged uneasy looks, and Ralph realized he had already begun to revise his mental picture of them as omniscient and all-powerful. They might be supernatural creatures, but Dr. Joyce brothers, they were not. He had an idea they weren't much shakes at predicting the future either. Guys with really efficient crystal balls probably wouldn't have a look like that in their entire repertoire. They're feeling their way along, just like the rest of us, Ralph thought, and he felt a certain reluctant sympathy for Mr. C and Mr. L. The blue-green arc of light floating in front of Lachesis, and the images trapped inside it suddenly disappeared. Clotho sounding defensive. "Please remember that it was your choice to see, Ralph and Lois. We did not show you that willingly." Ralph barely heard this. His terrible idea was still developing, like a photograph one does not wish to see but cannot turn away from. He was thinking of Bill's hat, Rosalie's faded blue bandana, and Lois's missing diamond earrings. "Well, fuck your friends over, Shorts. Do you get it? I hope so. I most certainly do." He looked from Clotho to Lachesis, his sympathy for them disappearing. What replaced it was a dull pulse of anger. Lachesis had said there was not any such thing as accidental death, and that it included Mr. McGovern. Ralph had no idea or doubt that Atropos had taken McGovern when he had for one simple reason. He'd wanted to hurt Ralph, to punish Ralph for messing into what had Dorrance called it long-time business. Old Dorrance suggested he not do that. A good policy, no doubt, but he, Ralph, had really had no choice, because these 2 bold half-pints had messed in with him. They had, in a very real sense, gotten Bill McGovern killed. Clotho and Lachesis saw his anger and took a step backward, although they seemed to do it without actually moving their feet, their faces becoming more uneasy than ever. "You 2 are the reason Bill McGovern's dead. That's the truth of it, isn't it?" "Clotho, please, if you'll just let us finish explaining." Lois was staring at Ralph, worried and scared. "Ralph, what's wrong? Why are you angry?" "Don't you get it? This little setup of theirs cost Bill McGovern his life. We're here because Atropos has either done something these guys don't like or is getting ready to. Lachesis, you're jumping to conclusions, Ralph. But there's one very basic problem. He knows we see him. Atropos knows we see him? Lois's eyes widen with terror and with understanding. Chapter 18. A small white hand fell on Ralph's shoulder and lay there like smoke. Please, if you'll only let us explain. He felt that change, that blink, happen in his body even before he was fully aware he had willed it. He could feel the wind again coming out of the dark like the blade of cold knife, and shivered. The touch of Clotho's hand was now no more than a phantom vibration, just below the surface of his skin. He could see all three of them, but now they were milky and faint. Now they were ghosts. I've stepped down, not all the way back down to where we started, but at least down to a level where they can have almost no physical contact with me. My aura, my balloon string, yes, I'm sure they could get at those things, but the physical part of me that lives my real life in the short-time world. No way, Jose. Lois's voice is distant as a faded echo. Ralph, what are you doing to... He looked at the ghostly images of Clotho and Lachesis. Now they looked not just uneasy and slightly guilty, but downright scared. Their faces were distorted and hard to see, but their fear was nonetheless unmistakable. Clotho, his voice distant but audible. Come back, Ralph. Please come back. If I do, will you quit playing games and be straight with us? Lachesis fading, disappearing. Yes, yes. Ralph made that interior blink happen again. The three of them came back into focus. At the same time, color once more filled up the spaces of the world, and time resumed its former spirit and sprint. He observed the waning moon sliding down the far side of the sky like a dollop of glowing mercury. Lois threw her arms around his neck, and for a moment he wasn't sure if she was hugging him or trying to strangle him. Thank God, I thought you were going to leave me. Ralph kissed her, and for a moment his head was filled with a pleasant jumble of sensory input. The taste of fresh honey, a texture like combed wool, and the smell of apples. A thought flipped across his mind. What would it be like to make love up here? And he banished it at once. He needed to think and speak very carefully in the next few minutes, hours, days. And thinking about stuff like that would only make it that much harder. He turned to the little bald doctors and measured them with his eyes. I hope you mean it, because if you don't, I think we'd better call this horse race off right now and go our separate ways. Clotho and Lachesis didn't bother with the exchanged glance this time. They both nodded eagerly. Lachesis spoke, and he did so in a defensive tone of voice. These fellows, Ralph suspected, were a lot more pleasant to deal with than Atropos, but no more used to being questioned, to being put on their mettle, Ralph's mother would have said, than he was. Everything he told you was true, Ralph and Lois. We may have left out the possibility that Atropos has slightly greater understanding of the situation than we would really like, but... Ralph, what if we refuse to listen to any more of this nonsense? What if we just turn and walk away? Neither replied, but Ralph thought he was seeing a dismaying thing in their eyes. They knew that Atropos had Lois's earrings, and they knew he knew. The only one who didn't know, he hoped, was Lois herself. She was now tugging his arm. Don't do that, Ralph. Please don't. We need to hear them out. He turned back to them and made a curt motion for them to go on. Lachesis, under ordinary circumstances, we don't interfere with Atropos, nor he with us. We couldn't interfere with him even if we wanted to. The random and the purpose are like the red and black squares on a checkerboard. defining each other by contrast, but Atropus does want to interfere with the way things operate. Interfering is, in a very real sense, what he was made to do, and on rare occasions, the opportunity to do so in a really big way presents itself. Efforts to stop his meddling are rare. Clotho. The truth is actually a little stronger, Ralph and Lois. Never in our experience has an effort been made to check or bar him. Lachesis. And are made only if the situation into which he intends to meddle is a very delicate one, where many serious matters are balanced and counterbalanced. This is one of those situations. Atropus has severed a life cord he would have done well to leave alone. This will cause terrible problems on all levels, not to mention a serious imbalance between the random and the purpose, unless the situation is rectified. We cannot deal with what's happening. The situation has passed far beyond our skills. We can no longer see clearly, let alone act. Yet in this case, our inability to see hardly matters because, in the end, only short-timers can oppose the will of Atropus. That is why you two are here. Ralph, are you saying that Atropus cut the cord of someone who was supposed to die a natural death or purposeful death? Clotho, not exactly. Some lives, very few, are not clear designation. When Atropus touches such lives, trouble is always likely. All bets are off, you say. Such designated lives are like. Clotho drew his hands apart, and an image, playing cards again, flashed between them. I wrote 7 cards that were swiftly turned over, one after another, by an unseen hand. An ace, a deuce, a joker, a trey, a 7, a queen. The last card the invisible hand flipped over was blank. Clotho. Does this picture help? Ralph's brow furrowed. He didn't know if it did or not. Somewhere out there was a person who was neither a regular playing card nor a joker in the deck. A person who was perfectly blank, up for grabs by either side. Atropus had slashed this guy's metaphysical air holes, and now somebody or something had called a timeout. Lois, it's Ed you're talking about, isn't it? Ralph rolled around and stared at her sharply, but she was looking at Lachesis. Ed knew is the blank card? Lachesis was nodding. How did you know that, Lois? Who else could it be? She wasn't smiling at him precisely, but Ralph felt the sense of a smile. She turned back to Clotho and Lachesis. Okay, at last we're getting somewhere, so I'll flash the red light on this deal. I think it was you guys. I have an idea that, on this one at least, you two aren't much more than the hired help. Put their heads together for a moment and murmured. But Ralph saw a faint ochre tinge appear like a seam at the place where the gringled oars overlapped and knew he was right. At last the two of them faced Ralph and Lois again. Lachesis. Yes, that is basically the case. You have a way of putting things in perspective, Ralph. We haven't had a conversation like this in 1,000 years. Clotho, if ever. Lachesis, as plaintively as a child. We have been. Ralph, the whole truth? Lachesis, all right, the whole truth. Yes, it is Ed Demue's card. And the cord that Atropus cut. We don't know this because we have seen it. We've passed beyond our ability to see clearly, as I said, because it is the only logical conclusion. Demue is undesignated, neither of the random nor the purpose that we do know, and his must have been some sort of master cord to have caused all this uproar and concern. The very fact that he has lived so long after his life cord was severed indicates his power and importance. When Atropus severed his cord, he set a terrible chain of events in motion. Lois shivered and stepped closer to Ralph. Lachesis. You called us hired help. You are more right than you know. We are in this case simply messengers. Our job is to make you and Lois aware of what has happened and what is expected of you. And that job is now almost done. as to who flashed the red light. We can't answer that question because we don't really know. I don't believe you. But he heard the lack of conviction in his own voice. If it was a voice. Clotho, don't be silly. Of course you do. Would you expect the directors of a large automobile company to invite a lowly worker up to the boardroom so they could explain the reasons behind all the company's policies, or perhaps give him the details on why they decided to close one plant and leave another one open? Lachesis. We're a little more highly praised than the men who work on automobile assembly lines, but we're still what you would call working Joes. Rough, or more, no less. Clotho. Be content with this beyond the short-time levels of existence and the long-time levels on which Lachesis, Octopus, and I exist. And yet their levels, these are inhabited by creatures we could call all-timers. Beings which are either eternal or so close to it as to make no difference. Short-timers and long-timers live in overlapping spheres of existence. On connected floors of the same building, if you like, ruled by the random and the purpose. Above these floors, inaccessible to us but very much a part of the same tower of existence, live other beings. Some of them are marvelous and wonderful, others are hideous beyond all ability to comprehend, let alone yours. These beings might be called the higher purpose and the higher random, or perhaps there is no random beyond a certain level. We suspect that may be the case, but we have no real way of telling. We do know that it is something from one of these higher levels that has interested itself in Ed, and that something else from up there made a counter move. The counter move is you, Ralph and Lois. Lois gave Ralph a dismayed look that he hardly noticed. The idea that something was moving them around like chess pieces in Fade Chapin's beloved Runway 3 classic, an idea that would have infuriated him under other circumstances, went right by him for the time being. He was remembering the night Ed had called him on the telephone. "We're drifting into deep water," he said, "and there are things swimming around in the undertow you can't even conceive of." Entities, in other words. Alright, so we're going to leave it there for just now and go to our first music break. On this music break, we have the lovely and talented Miss Mia Savage, and she's going to be singing Your Skeleton, On New Reality, Lemurian Crypto, and Let Me Be Your Home. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.